Before I start my remarks, I think it's important for all senators to know that when there were negotiations going on between the White House and the Democrats in the House of Representatives, one of the really sticking points was enforcement, and I think everybody expects a trade agreement to be enforced, but a lot more had to be done than what was originally agreed to when the agreement was signed. And I think I would want to recognize Senator Wyden and Senator Brown because months before, maybe even years before, I don't want to take away from how hard they were working on some ways of improving enforcement, but at least they had an idea out there that was sellable or saleable to both sides. And I don't know whether it was 100% or 90% or 80% that was incorporated into this bill, but their laying that groundwork was the basis for getting an agreement between the White House and the House of Representatives so we can move this to the point where the Senate's going to pass it tomorrow, I hope. So I thank the Senator, and Senator Brown's not here, but maybe you can tell him I said thank you. It's said that good things come to those who wait. Others say that it's better late than never. Either way, we can agree that this day has been a long time coming. With the passage of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, by what will be an overwhelming margin here in the United States Senate, America's economy will continue to thrive and drive prosperity for hardworking American farmers, workers, and taxpayers all across our economy. You've heard the old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. The new NAFTA, the bill that we're working on, puts a bigger oar in the water for our trilateral trade relationship with our northern and southern neighbors. It's important to point out that we wouldn't be here without the bold leadership and the determination of President Trump. The president is doing exactly what he said he would do. So many people running for president run on a platform, but they don't stand on that platform. He ran on a platform of doing something about what he considered bad trade agreements. And, of course, he is standing on that platform. Undaunted by those who set to throw him out of office since day one, President Trump forged ahead for the good of the American people. He forged ahead to update and improve NAFTA for Americans. We heard during the campaign that it was the president's opinion that it's the worst agreement that's ever been made. Now, I might not agree with that, the extreme of that, but I do know, as Senator Wyden has pointed out, that there were a lot of things that weren't even negotiable 30 years ago when we first thought of NAFTA, and at least an updating was needed to be done. Now, the president has done more than update. But as the president promised during his campaign, at the end of the day, President Trump successfully steered this vital trade pact into the 21st century. He did so with a tireless and tenacious team of advisors, especially the leadership of the U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer. And Senator Wyden just gave more adjectives to Bob Lighthizer's work, and I associate myself with the remarks and the description that Senator Wyden gave to Bob Lighthizer's heavy lift to get this job done, because Bob Lighthizer worked in good faith to broker and fine-tune the USMCA. Mr. Lighthizer built a strong and sweeping coalition to strengthen and expand markets for U.S. agriculture, manufacturing, and service exports. Mr. Lighthizer built a broad and sweeping coalition to improve labor and environmental protections in a balanced fashion. And Mr. Lighthizer built a broad and sweeping coalition that ends up growing wages for our workers. And he ensured that all of this would be subject to strong enforcement, which is the bedrock of any good trade agreement. And it's that enforcement that he took good ideas from Wyden and Brown. Unfortunately, these efforts that I just described to you became entangled in time-wasting partisan roadblock from the House of Representatives. It's unfortunate for the American people, especially our farmers, ranchers, and workers, that public policy making took a back seat to a partisan obsession of impeaching the 45th president. That's a shame. The president is upholding his promise to put America and Americans first. His message resonates with tens of millions of Americans who want to restore the American dream for their children and grandchildren. These Americans want the next generation to have the same opportunity to lay claim to the American dream that 9 generations before, going back to the colonies, have built upon, so each generation can live better than the preceding generation. That American dream is, if you work hard and play by the rules, you can earn a good living, get ahead, and stay ahead. A big plank in President Trump's platform is fixing broken trade agreements. And USMCA is not the first of it, because he's worked with Japan and he's worked with Korea. And today we saw the signing of phase 1 of the Chinese agreement. So he's making great progress. The president's determined to stop America's farmers and manufacturers and workers and consumers from being taken for a ride. When it comes to unfair trade agreements, we're finding out now the buck stops with President Trump. And I'm not sure 3 years ago I would have said that. But I think after 3 years and USMCA, the Chinese agreement, the Korean agreement, the Japanese agreement, and some other things he's done in trade, he ought to wake everybody up that what he ran on in his platform, he's carried out. Now with NAFTA, when it took effect 26 years ago this month, the digital economy and the commercialization of the internet didn't even exist. The USMCA creates the first U.S. free trade agreement with digital trade chapter. These important measures will help the $1 3/10 trillion U.S. digital economy to flourish and grow faster. It improves efforts to stop importers of counterfeit goods from ripping off consumers, producers, and content creators. It provides for copyright and patent protections to uphold trade secrets and to secure data rights, so American ingenuity and innovation will drive economic growth, create jobs, drive up consumer choices, and drive down prices for goods and services our consumers need. The USMCA levels the playing field for the U.S. auto industry by encouraging companies to use more North American content and higher wage labor. USMCA also fixes enforcement flaws that hogtied NAFTA from keeping everyone accountable to their commitments. Speaking of hogs, the new NAFTA is good news for American farmers and ranchers. And my state of Iowa happens to benefit from this to a great extent because my state is the nation's #1 pork producer. In 2018, Canada and Mexico bought more than 40% of U.S. pork exports. These exports support 16,000 U.S. jobs. USMCA preserves critical duty-free access to Mexico and Canada, and it removes unfair restrictions on U.S. farm and food products. For the first time ever, U.S. eggs and dairy exports will be sold in Canada. This is very good news. It means that an additional $227 million for dairy exports to Canada and $50.6 million of exports into Mexico. My home state of Iowa also is #1 egg producer in the country. USMCA will increase U.S. exports of poultry and eggs to Canada by $207 million. It also addresses restrictions that kept U.S. wheat and wine out of Canada. I'd particularly like to thank the former Iowa governor and previous Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, because as the leading Democrat in the state of Iowa, he set aside partisan motives embraced by other members of his party to work together with me, Senator Ernst, and Governor Kim Reynolds to champion USMCA. According to the U.S. International Trade Commission, the USMCA will raise real GDP by more than $68 billion, and USMCA will create nearly 176,000 jobs. So all told, the trade pact is forecast to boost farm and food exports by at least $2.2 billion. Considering the slump in the farm economy, it's really shameful that passage of the USMCA was stalled for over a year and nearly derailed by a partisan agenda, including the impeachment. Under the Trump economy, the United States is enjoying the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. Ratification of the USMCA will help America's economic engine fire on all cylinders and refuel prosperity in rural America. Now, if you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, passage of USMCA is better late than never. And while I'm looking forward, I'd also like to take this opportunity to call on Canada to quickly ratify the agreement. Now that Mexico has ratified and the United States will soon be done with our ratification, all eyes will be on Canada to get the job done quickly so we can all work together to implement this agreement. And I don't have any doubt that Canada is going to do that, because I had opportunities earlier last year several times to visit with the Canadian foreign minister, and she was very certain that they would be passing this. So let's not delay people's business on other important matters before us, such as drug pricing and retirement and pension legislation that would provide peace of mind for Americans for their health care and financial security. I yield the floor.